Buffalo really was, in my opinion, is one of the great American cities. In 1900, the city was the 8th largest in the country, which sort of speaks to its importance in our country in terms of a center of industry and commerce and culture. And we have so much of that legacy still remaining in our city, especially of our built environment, our architecture, masterworks by Frank Lloyd Wright, Louis Sullivan, H. Richardson, that are being repurposed and restored and rejuvenated, and kind of are the cornerstone of some of our city's renaissance right now.
Buffalo is, I think, one of the biggest small towns in America, mostly because its heritage is really neighborhoods that were the result of immigrants in the late 19th century.
Three of the great American architects were Frank Lloyd Wright, Louis Sullivan, and Henry Hobson Richardson. And Buffalo is one of a very select few cities to have examples of work from all three architects, which again speaks to just how important the city was back in its heyday. The H. Richardson, is a National Historic Landmark, the Richardson Olmsted campus. It's now an 88-room boutique hotel, Hotel Henry. Louis Sullivan created one of the first skyscrapers in the history of skyscrapers in downtown Buffalo, the Guarantee Building, which was meticulously restored as well. And Frank Lloyd Wright has over a half dozen of his designs in Buffalo. The city was a linchpin in Wright's career, branching out from a greater Chicago architect to someone of national renown, and the city helped him do that. So, it goes without saying that we are a city of incredible architectural masterworks, and the fact that so many have been restored, repurposed, rejuvenated, speaks to, how exciting a time it really is in Buffalo to explore right now. In addition to that, there's so many opportunities to see our architecture. There are daily tours of the Art Deco masterpiece of City Hall that are offered by Preservation Buffalo Niagara. Explore Buffalo has a litany of wonderful architectural tours in our city. It's wonderful to go and see a show at Shays with all the sort of interiors designed by Louis Comfort Tiffany. So I think what's neat about the architecture in Buffalo, it's not an end to itself, where you might just go and, think that the architecture looks nice or tour a building or two. It becomes the backdrop and the common thread through all of your experiences here, whether you're going to see a show at Shays or at Babeville, a restored church on Delaware Avenue, or you're going to stay overnight at Hotel Henry, or you're drinking a beer in the ruins of a grain silo that have been repurposed. It becomes the backdrop and the common thread, the architecture, the built environment of everything you do in Buffalo.
A lot of the architecture reflected the golden age of the early part of the 20th century. They were built massively with incredible and intricate artwork in the craftsmanship of true artisans. Was obvious. You see it when you go to Shays today, but it was done in every theater. When you go to the Riviera in North Tonawanda, you see that, even though it is probably, I'm going to guess, 10% the size of Shays. And I think the Pan Am Exposition really was Buffalo at its height. The Historical Society on Delaware Lake still remains. It's the only real piece of architecture left from the Pan Am Exposition. And it's remarkable. It is in that neoclassic Greek kind of model. And to have those kinds of things as part of what we see every day are just gems. And that's what Buffalo was. It was a small town with some incredible diamonds in the rough, and some very polished diamonds.
We're one of the great sports cities in the United States, home to the NFL's Buffalo Bills, the NHL's Buffalo Sabres. a great minor league team in the Buffalo Bisons, who I think play at one of the great minor league ballparks in the whole country too. Anyone who's never been to Coca-Cola Field, it's built in the late 1980s. It's celebrating 30 years this year. It's a great retro style downtown ballpark. It was one of the first of its kind when it was built in the late 80s. When you go to a Buffalo sporting event, particularly a Bills tailgate, or you're downtown for a Sabres game, and you get to meet other Buffalo sports fans, you realize how passionate and enthusiastic they are about their teams, but it's really an extension of how much locals here are passionate about Buffalo. So it's an experience that every visitor should have at least once, to go to a Bills tailgate, to meet the locals, to enjoy what's really just a great party in the lots, surrounding New Era Field, because it speaks to the sort of palpable enthusiasm that so many locals here have for their city and for their teams.
You grow up in Buffalo, you are born into a sports family. It's impossible not to be. We live and we die by our sports teams, and the history of sports in Buffalo is quite long. In my lifetime, I was 5 years old when the Buffalo Bills were founded, and yet there were other Buffalo professional football teams prior to that, but never to the degree that the Bills are. And so from the age of 5, as any red-blooded American boy would be, I loved football. I was a Bills fan. The relationship between Buffalo and the Buffalo Bills is probably really an example of what Buffalo is. You're a family. You are this city of good neighbors, and you have a bond. And it probably just like a family. You might fight between brothers and sisters and cousins or whatever, but no one else better pick on your family, because you're going to defend your brother, you're going to defend your sister. And so when the Bills would be the brunt of jokes or whatever, sports writers from Oakland or whatever, nothing raised the hair on the back of our necks as Buffalonians than defending the Bills. And you see it today. You still feel it regardless. There is a passion that I don't think exists in any other city. And we identify with them. We identify with being the underdog and just, taking it on the chin, no matter what happens.
I think that enjoying winter is a part of what every Buffalonian's life should be. We are very lucky to have 4 distinct seasons, and each season can be appreciated in its own way. So I think what's neat about the last few years is that we're taking our winter and owning it like never before, by opening the ice at Canal Side, by developing the ice bikes of Buffalo, which are the only kind available for public rental in North America, made right here in Buffalo and rented at Canal Side. Nearby snowshoeing, skiing, cross-country skiing opportunities. I think, when you have winter, then you appreciate summer that much more too. And we don't take any summer day for granted here too. The beautiful summer days, the breeze off the lake, the festivals that run every weekend in the summer. I personally wouldn't have it any other way to have 4 distinct seasons, and I think it's something we can really play up as a destination to our advantage too.
The City of Good Neighbors is not just something that was a slogan or a motto to recruit people or make us known across the nation. It really is what you experienced. I remember growing up, I grew up in the old First Ward of South Buffalo, and it was kind of interesting because being of Italian and Polish descent, we were in a small pocket of Polish people in a very Irish area, so it was an interesting challenge sometimes growing up in that. But the unique thing about the City of Good Neighbors was that concept of being able to, as a child, as a young person, go outside and play with your friends. And never did our parents worry about where we were or that we were safe, because they knew someone was watching. And even when we tried to get into mischief, there was always that one person, that adult who knew you or was related to you, and you always had this healthy fear of not doing something wrong because somehow that would get back to your mom or dad. And I think it was that whole idea of looking out for each other, and you were truly. It's funny that we talk about it takes a village to raise a child. Well, that was what Buffalo was about. Those villages were neighborhoods. And so the city of good neighbors was this extension of family that you were raised by many people. You were raised by a neighborhood. You were actually defined by a neighborhood. We're also an underdog. As much as Buffalo at the turn of the 20th century, the early 1900s, was one of the 5 largest cities in America, we were still a collection of neighborhoods and cultures of common people, the working man, so to speak. And to this day, you find it in Buffalo sports and many other aspects of our culture. We are very much common folk, hardworking, very traditional values, very core values centered on family and friendship. And I think the city of good neighbors is not only a reflection of that, but the result of that.
I think one of Buffalo's greatest strengths actually are its diversity of neighborhoods. I could go and get wings at Gabriel's Gate in Allentown, and then go and grab a coffee at Cafe Aroma in the Elmwood Village, see a show at the North Park Theater on Hurdle Avenue, grab an ice cream at Parkside Candy in University Heights, and then go down and have a beer at Old First Ward Brewing Company in the shadow of the grain silos at Gene McCarthy's Pub in the Old First Ward. And every single experience in a different neighborhood feels like I'm somewhere very unique and special. And I think any great city can be measured by sort of the diversity of its neighborhoods, the feeling that even when you're within that city, that you're within many remarkably different places, all within a short distance of one another. And I think that's one of Buffalo's greatest strengths. That's what I enjoy sort of most about this city too. So the last 10 years have really been just so exciting in Buffalo. The city has had this incredible transformation rooted in over $1 billion in new development. The redevelopment of our waterfront and canal side, taking old grain silos at Riverworks and turning them into a brewery, beer garden, rock climbing wall, zip line. The rejuvenation, restoration of our architectural gems, new hotels, new breweries, distilleries, restaurants. We've seen more new development here in the last decade than in the couple of decades, prior to that combined. And I think it's so exciting for people who haven't been to Buffalo in a while or think that they know Buffalo to come here and rediscover it and see all that's changed here in the last 10 years.
I've often been told that I bleed blue and gold. And I think that's probably a very safe statement to make. My association with Canisius College and Canisius High School spans, let's see, student at Canisius High for 4 years, a faculty member of Canisius High for 19 years, a bachelor's degree from Canisius College, a master's degree from Canisius College. So I think it's safe to say that I've been influenced by the Jesuits my entire life. And I have not only a love for the education I received and the people who really helped shape me as a person, but I have an appreciation for their history. And Canisius High School and Canisius College began as one entity in 1870, and they began on Washington Street in Buffalo, right next to St. Michael's Church, which is on the western side of Market Arcade. And the Jesuits, who still obviously run both Canisius High School and College, had come to the United States to serve the German immigrants, and had built a couple of parishes, and St. Michael's was one of them, and started out to serve the German immigrants in Western New York, particularly in Buffalo. And in doing so, always did it not only through a church, but through education. And what started out as St. Michael's Day School turned into Canisius High School and College. And it remained on Washington Street, at least as a combined school, until the early 1900s, when Canisius College realized it needed to expand and separate from the high school. So they made the bold move of moving to the edge of the city of Buffalo, at Jefferson and Maine. And it's interesting because I purposely say to the edge of the city, because in that part of the early part of the 20th century, that was the outer edge of the city of Buffalo. And they did it with the whole idea that they could expand. Now, if you look at that area today, you question whether my sanity remains, because you are smack in the heart of the city. But I think it also is a reflection of the growth that occurred in Buffalo during the 20th century. So Canisius College had moved there in the early part of that century, and has done an incredible job with its what I call sensitive expansion. There's always going to be the great debate about the Churchill Academic Tower and how it was built in front of Old Main, and many old timers will express their displeasure with that. But in all reality, the expansion that has taken place over the years at Canisius, I think, has both been tasteful but also sensitive to the neighborhood. It truly wanted to become a partner with the neighbors in that particular area of the city, and have done reasonably well in doing so. In fact, have taken many buildings that, quite frankly, would have remained abandoned. The Montante Cultural Center was St. Vincent de Paul Church, and I think the college did an incredible job maintaining its character as a church, yet fulfilling it as another multi-purpose facility. My baccalaureate mass was actually in St. Vincent's, now the Montante Center. I believe the math building now that lies between the Kessler Center and the main campus, at one time was a Sears Roebuck store. In fact, I remember as a little kid getting lost in there with my brother and having to go to a sales clerk so they could page my mother, because I think I was 5 years old at the time. That eventually became an office complex for Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and probably had seen a few other tenants in there. But I think as retail was dying and as office space was moving out to the suburbs, Canisius did the right thing, not only for itself but for the neighborhood, by converting that building to its educational uses. So you have where I went to school as a student and where I worked, this complex of buildings that were not just architectural marvels, but full of history. I mean, to have a president of the United States die, in a building that was occupied by people that taught you, or eventually you parked your car, it is just, where do you get that kind of experience? So I think you look at the architecture, and if you look at it from the educational perspective, the education was not just what you learned in the classroom. You were surrounded by it. You were surrounded by forest, lawn, cemetery, and all these other things that you cannot separate the history of Buffalo and Western New York from. And so the education that you received as a high school student or even a college student immersed you in this history. And how lucky could you be?